My daughter looked at me, her eyes filled with a cold disgust I'd never seen before, and delivered the line that would shatter our family. "Honestly, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with pity, "you're just bitter because Mom upgraded." In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it turned to steel. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, leaving her alone with a half-cooked dinner. She had no idea that by morning, she wouldn't have a ride to school, and her mother was about to discover who was really paying the bills for her upgraded lifestyle. I'm a 42-year-old man, and I never imagined myself becoming the kind of person who airs their family's dirty laundry on the internet. But here I am, 3 years after my divorce. I'm still excavating the wreckage, and I've only just begun to understand the profound, insidious damage a bitter ex-wife can inflict on the relationship you have with your own children. The catalyst for this revelation, the event that finally forced me to draw a line in the sand, happened last Tuesday. My teenage daughter was staying with me for the weekend, a rare occurrence that I'd begun to cherish like a precious commodity. Ever since the split, she had increasingly gravitated towards her mother's orbit, leaving my home feeling cavernous and quiet. I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce that I'd been simmering for hours, trying to fill the silence with the comforting aroma of home-cooked food. That's when she decided to detonate the bomb that would irrevocably alter the landscape of our lives. She was glued to her phone, her thumb scrolling endlessly through a digital world that held far more of her attention than I did. Without looking up, she started nonchalantly recounting the latest exploits of her mom's new boyfriend. He had taken him to some ridiculously expensive restaurant downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and waiters who hover. He drove a sleek, black BMW that she described with almost reverential detail. He was, apparently, in the process of planning a lavish European vacation for them all this summer. Each update was a small, precise jab to my gut, a reminder of the narrative my ex-wife was carefully crafting. But I bit my tongue and continued to stir the sauce, the rhythmic clinking of the wooden spoon against the pot a fragile shield against the rising tide of my own resentment. Then, the scrolling stopped. She finally looked up, and the expression on her face was alien to me. It was cold, detached, and bordering on disgusted, as if she were looking at something pathetic. "Mom says you've been holding us back financially," she stated, not as a question, but as an established fact. She said that if you actually cared about our future, you'd stop being so difficult about the support payments. My hand froze over the stove. The air thickened. I asked her, my voice dangerously calm, what she meant by that. She let out an exasperated sigh, the kind reserved for explaining something painfully obvious to a child. "Mom explained it all," she said, rolling her eyes. "She said you're just bitter about the divorce settlement. You can't accept that she's moved on with someone better, so you're making everyone suffer for it." The words were like shards of ice piercing my chest. I carefully placed the wooden spoon on the counter, its sauce-covered tip leaving a crimson stain, and turned to face her fully. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, searching for the little girl who used to think I was a superhero. When had her eyes started to reflect this stranger's judgment? When did I transform from her father into the villain of her mother's story? "Is that what you think, too?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you really believe I'm just some bitter, miserable man trying to ruin your mother's happiness?" She held my gaze for a moment, her own unwavering, and then she delivered the final, fatal blow. "Honestly, Dad, you're just bitter because Mom upgraded." The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where the last remnants of our connection seemed to just evaporate. I felt a distinct snap deep within my chest. The sound of a support beam that had been groaning under pressure for 3 long years finally giving way. As if she had just made a casual comment about the weather, she immediately looked back down at her phone, her face illuminated by its cold, blue light. She was gone, retreated back into her world, leaving me standing in the wreckage she'd just created. Without another word, I turned off the stove, the half-finished dinner a monument to my failure. I walked to the counter, picked up my wallet and keys, and headed for the door. She didn't look up. She didn't ask where I was going or when I'd be back. She just kept scrolling, utterly oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the fact that she was watching her father's heartbreak in real time. I drove for hours that night with no destination in mind. The car became a time capsule, and as I drifted through familiar neighborhoods, my mind replayed a highlight reel of my life. I saw myself working 60-hour weeks, missing dinners and school plays, all to build a life for a family that now saw me as an obstacle. I saw the pride on my wife's face when we bought our first house, a memory now tainted by the knowledge of how it all ended. The divorce was a brutal, ugly affair, a war of attrition fought through lawyers. I thought, naively, that we had managed to shield the kids from the worst of the shrapnel. How wrong I was. It became painfully clear that my ex-wife hadn't just moved on. She had launched a covert, 3-year campaign to rewrite our shared history, meticulously painting me as the antagonist, and I was the only one who hadn't received the script. When I finally returned home, well after midnight, the house was dark and silent. Her bedroom light was off. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the congealed pasta sauce on the cold stove, and in that moment of profound loneliness, I made a decision. The next morning, I was already at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee when she emerged from her room, dressed for school. She moved with an air of casual expectation, grabbing her backpack and heading for the door. "Are you ready to go?" she asked, her tone implying my role as her chauffeur was a non-negotiable fact of her existence. I didn't look up from my screen. "I won't be driving you," I said calmly. "Not today, not anymore. You'll need to find another way to get there." She stopped, her hand frozen on her backpack strap. The confusion that washed over her face was almost laughable. "What do you mean?" she stammered, as if the very concept of consequence was a foreign language. It was then that I finally looked at her. "I mean," I said, my voice even and steady, "that since I'm just a bitter failure who can't accept that your mother has upgraded, perhaps you should ask her upgrade for a ride. I hear he has a very nice BMW." Her face flushed with anger, and she started to protest, stammering that she didn't mean it like that, but I raised my hand to cut her off. "No," I said firmly. "I heard you perfectly. You were loud and clear. I finally understand my place in this new family dynamic, and I'm simply adjusting my contributions accordingly." The panic began to set in. She fumbled for her phone and tried to call her mom, but it went straight to voicemail. Her voice, when she left the message, was high-pitched and strained, laced with a desperation I'd never heard from her before. "Mom, Dad's being weird," she pleaded into the phone. "He won't drive me to school. Can you please call me back right away?" She hung up and started pacing the kitchen, a caged animal, her eyes darting between her phone and me. 20 minutes crawled by. Then 30. The silence was thick with her mounting anxiety. "Are you really going to let me be late for school over this?" she finally snapped, her voice trembling. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "This isn't about you being late for school," I explained patiently. "This is about you understanding that words have weight and actions have consequences. You see, the bitter failure you look down on is the very same man who has been driving you to school every morning, buying the clothes on your back, paying for the phone in your hand, and quietly covering all the expenses your mother and her upgrade can't seem to handle." Her posture changed. The anger deflated, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "What do you mean, covering expenses?" she asked quietly. That was my cue. I turned my laptop towards her and opened a file I had meticulously maintained for 3 years, a spreadsheet. It was a detailed, dated log of every single dollar I had provided that went beyond the court-ordered child support. Every emergency transfer when her mom was a little short on rent. Every time I had quietly paid a utility bill to keep the lights on or cover grocery run. The numbers were stark and undeniable, staggering even to me when I saw them all aggregated in one place. Over $40,000 in 3 years. $40,000 of my money, given without fanfare or complaint, because I refused to let my children suffer for their mother's financial irresponsibility, even if it meant my own dinners consisted of ramen noodles for weeks at a time. My daughter fell silent, her eyes scanning line after damning line. Her mother's rent, paid by me on 6 separate occasions in the last 2 years. The car payment for the Honda her mother drove every day, that was me. The family phone plan that kept them all connected, my account. Even the magical Disney World vacation they had taken last year had been made possible by a last-minute emergency request for funds that I had fulfilled without a single question. Her face had gone pale. Why did Mom never tell us any of this?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on the screen. "She always made it sound like you were being cheap." I closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the tense quiet of the kitchen. "Because, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer now, "your mother has been telling you a story where she's the victim and I'm the villain. But this spreadsheet, this isn't a story. This is the truth in black and white." The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a physical weight. The flashy BMW and the fancy dinners were just a facade. Her mom's upgrade was great for a night out on the town, but he wasn't the one keeping a roof over their heads or the power on. When the bills came due, It was the bitter failure they called for help. She tried her mom's phone again, her hand shaking. Still no answer. I stood up and grabbed my work bag. I have to get to work, I told her. You need to figure out your transportation. And I need you to understand that, starting today, things are going to be different. This isn't out of spite. It's because I'm done being treated like an ATM by people who don't have an ounce of respect for me. She started to cry then, begging me not to do this, promising she was sorry and didn't mean it. But the damage was done. The line had been crossed. I've already made my decision, I said, my resolve firm. For the next month, you're going to get a taste of what life would be like if I really was the person you seem to think I am. I walked out the door, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, her phone still pressed against her ear, a silent witness to the implosion of her world. The first week was every bit as dramatic as I had anticipated. My daughter missed the entire first day of school. Her mother finally called me back around noon, her voice a furious hiss in my ear. She demanded to know what kind of monster abandons his own child over a few silly words. I calmly asked her what kind of mother systematically teaches her child to despise the very man who has been secretly subsidizing their entire lifestyle for 3 years. The dead silence on the other end of the line was more telling than any confession. That evening, my ex-wife stormed my house, my daughter in tow, looking like a chastised puppy. She marched into my kitchen as if she still owned it, demanding that I stop this childish nonsense and resume my responsibilities. In response, I simply handed her a printed copy of the spreadsheet. I informed her that, effective immediately, my financial contributions will be strictly limited to the court-ordered amount. No more emergency funds. No more rent assistance. No more paying for her car or her phone. You've upgraded, I said simply. It's time for him to handle the responsibilities that come with that title. The color drained from her face as the full implications of my words sank in. She sputtered, trying to argue that the kids would suffer, that I was being petty and vindictive. I just looked at her. According to your own narrative, I reminded her, you found someone better. I'm just giving him the space to prove it. My daughter watched the entire exchange, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She was finally seeing the true power dynamics that had been operating beneath the surface of her life. And it was nothing like the story her mother had been selling her. The cracks in her mom's upgraded life began to appear almost immediately. Suddenly, the boyfriend with the BMW was too busy to provide rides. The fancy dinner dates dwindled. When my ex, facing an inevitable rent shortfall, asked him for help, he suddenly had a litany of his own prior financial commitments. On Thursday, my daughter called and asked if we could talk. Her voice was different, smaller, more fragile. It was the voice of the little girl I thought I had lost. She came over that evening, and we sat on the back porch as the sun went down. She haltingly admitted that she had been carrying around so much anger about the divorce, and that it was just easier to direct it all at me, especially when her mom was constantly reinforcing the idea that I was the one to blame. She confessed that she had gotten swept up in the glamour of her mom's new relationship, the promise of a more exciting life. This past week, she said, had been the coldest, hardest wake-up call of her life. Having to take the city bus when the BMW wasn't available, and then watching their phone service get cut off for non-payment, had made her realize who had actually been the stable, reliable force in their lives. She apologized, a genuine, heartfelt apology not just for her words, but for months of dismissive, disrespectful behavior. She said she finally understood why I had reacted so strongly, and she didn't blame me. I told her I appreciated it more than she knew, but that we couldn't just rewind the clock. Respect is built on actions, not just words, I told her. I need to see real, sustained change. She asked what that meant. I explained that I would continue to pay what the court required, but the bank of Dad was officially closed. If she needed a ride, she could ask me respectfully, and I would consider it if my schedule allowed. The days of me being a default utility were over. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I understand, she said. I want to fix this the right way. It was a beginning, but I knew we had a long road ahead. 2 weeks after the initial confrontation, my ex-wife's carefully constructed world came crashing down. Faced with her first month of living entirely on her own income, she was forced to confront reality. The BMW boyfriend delivered the final blow when she, in a moment of desperation, asked him to co-sign on a smaller, more affordable apartment. He refused, coolly explaining that he couldn't risk his credit score for her situation. The upgrade, it turned out, had a terrible return policy. In stark contrast, my daughter was making a real effort. She started coming over for dinner twice a week, not as a visitor, but as a participant. She helped me cook, she engaged in actual conversation, and she even asked me to teach her how to create a budget, saying she never wanted to be ignorant about money again. One evening, she handed me a letter. In it, she took full responsibility for her words and for blindly accepting her mother's narrative. She wrote about how the past few weeks had taught her the difference between flashy gestures and true, dependable support. The real test, however, came when her mother tried to use her as a pawn. My ex begged her to convince me to resume the extra payments, just for a little while. My daughter came to me with the request, but instead of pressuring me, she asked me to talk her through my side of things again. We had a long, honest conversation about sacrifice and parental love. Afterwards, she went back to her mother and told her, with a maturity that astounded me, that she needed to figure out her own finances without my help. She said it wasn't fair for her to expect me to fund a lifestyle from which I was constantly criticized and excluded. My ex-wife did not take it well. She accused me of poisoning our daughter against her, of being a vindictive manipulator. During one heated phone call, which my daughter overheard, she threatened to take me back to court for emotional manipulation. That was the moment something shifted in my daughter for good. The final straw came when my ex, in a fit of pique, suggested that if my daughter was going to side with me, maybe she should just go live with me full-time. She said it as a threat, a bluff designed to terrify our daughter into submission. But it backfired spectacularly. My daughter calmly replied, "Actually, Mom, that sounds like a good idea. I think it's time for a change." The stunned silence on the other end of the phone was priceless. Her ultimate power play had been called, and she had lost. A month has passed since that fateful Tuesday, and my life is unrecognizable. My daughter moved in with me 2 weeks ago, and our home is finally starting to feel like a home again. She's not just living here, she's thriving. She's excelling in her classes, she got a part-time job to pay for her own phone, and she's joined the debate team. She's learning the value of a dollar and the pride of earning it herself. My ex-wife had to downsize into a small apartment she can barely afford. The BMW boyfriend vanished the moment he realized her life came with real-world responsibilities. Last week, she called me. For the first time in 3 years, she sounded humble. She admitted she had been unfair, that she had gotten lost in a fantasy and had used me as a scapegoat. She didn't ask for money. She asked if we could try to be better co-parents. I told her I was open to it on the condition that our relationship would be built on honesty from now on. No more games, no more lies. She agreed. My daughter is rebuilding her relationship with her mother, but on new, healthier terms. And last night, she came to me and thanked me for not giving up on her, even when she was at her worst. "You taught me what character is," she said, her eyes shining. "You showed me the difference between someone who says they love you and someone who proves it with their actions, even when you don't deserve it." The bitter failure her mom was so proud to have upgraded from was the one who had been there all along, sacrificing in silence. The revenge I got was not something I planned. It was simply the inevitable outcome of truth. I stepped back and allowed the natural consequences of their choices to play out. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is withdraw your support and let people discover for themselves what they truly lost.